Hey guys, Jessica Henry here. I just wanted to welcome you back today to my studio. I thought it'd be kind of fun and interesting to do a little video on composition. It's something that we have to deal with when we're painting, and so what I have come up with is I've taken three photographs of different subject matters. I have a photograph here of a landscape, and it has sort of a river coming through and the waterfall and some mountains. And then I also have another landscape. It's a snowy winter scene with a lot of atmosphere. And then I have a figure of this really cool guy in one of these historical reenactment costumes. And I thought it might be fun just to show you how I would work out a real quick composition for that. And then over here, I have just a real simple still life of a pot and a pear. And I thought that I would show you within the format of a rectangle how I would adjust size and placement using real objects. All right, so that is my project today, and thanks so much for joining me. Okay, so these are the colors I'm using on my palette today, just very simple. And I'm going to start out with just toning my little squares. This is linen, triple oil primed, Belgian linen, taped down to just a board. I'll put a thin coat of different shades of, it's burnt sienna, ultramarine blue. Sometimes I'll add more yellow ochre, just depending on what I'm going to put on that painting. That's how I'll gauge sort of that base color as it kind of shines through the paint. So I put a little on and then I wipe some of it off just because the surface would have a really slick texture with the Gamsol in it. So it's thinned down with Gamsol. All right, so I'm going to work on the first picture of the forest mountain scene here, this one. It's from Joseph, Oregon, when I lived out there. And I kind of wanted to try to capture a feeling of it looking like a plein air study. So when you're working from photos, the idea is to keep it really fresh feeling. And as far as composition goes, in this little study, I'm thinking about where my darks are first, and I'm laying in the overall structure. I think that the overall structure of the photograph is suitable for more or less just capturing that on the canvas. So I'm blocking in where I see those dark passages and major compositional elements. That river just shot off to the side of the canvas, so I'm making it so it kind of bends back into the painting because there is the waterfall as it comes down. So kind of turning that river, I thought, helped with the composition. And so I'm getting the angles of the mountain as it comes down towards us as the viewer. I'm always thinking about those strong angles in the painting in using the dark masses to help direct the eye to the focal point. And so that's what I'm working on here. I like that the trees provide that darker value range as a strong accent against the sky. It helps frame in exactly where I want the focal point of the painting to go. And so then there's this really beautiful vignette feel to this photograph of these dark pines as they kind of wrap around the edges of the painting. And so that's what I'm working on here, just using ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, grabbing a little bit of yellow ochre, and just massing in my values. I already have a middle tone down, so I'm going to get my darks and then I will put in some lights. Once I get those established and I'm fine and happy with the composition, I will move forward with the lights and then the color. So it's all about strong design when you're laying in a composition, and I'm looking for these abstract shapes and how they play against each other. I'm paying attention to the dark masses and how they feel against the middle tone masses. And since really the only light masses in this painting are in the sky, I'm just going to let those be supportive of everything else that's going on. So I like the sort of the balance and the juxtaposition of those two dark masses on the left-hand side of the canvas in relation to what's happening on the right hand. So I'm really enjoying that play with this. And then I know that down in that right corner there's some sunlit logs, and I add a little bit of that later, but for now I just want to use that strong mass of dark in there to help support and frame the whole painting. And so that's what I was thinking there with that. Really, the composition in a painting is basically just the grouping of various parts that make the whole thing a picture, just to boil it down. And when you're working from nature, you're faced with so many options and decisions. It's up to you to pare down what you need from nature to take those elements and tell your story. So you got to be selective in what you choose. And so I'm satisfied with the layout of my darks and middle tones in here now. So I'm just capturing those light areas up in the sky. I took some white and some more Gamsol, and it's kind of a soupy mixture up there. I'm just going to put a thin layer on and wipe it out so I can get a good feel of the scale of the value range for this painting. And so that's what I'm doing there. And you can always just use your paper towel to wipe it out. This little study, I had a lot of fun with it. I think I might actually turn it into a larger painting. I just wanted to see how the waterfall color, the value would look sort of in the middle, and then balance it out with some highlights in the river, just to see how all three of my light value tones will work together. So now, while I'm concentrating on that lighter, that more intense color value, I'm thinking about mixing up that foreground patch of sunlit grass, and that was cadmium yellow, pale, phthalo green, and some white. And I like it, but at the end of this, I actually punch it up a little bit brighter. But because the sky is in a value scale, it's number 1 for intense bright value. The ground receives the reflected light from the sky, so that's going to get your next lightest light. And so as I go up the hill here, it has some of those level spots where it's getting bounce light from the sky. And so that's what I'm picking up there with that bright sunny yellow. And your trees are going to be your darkest value in a painting because they're not picking up the light. They're just creating that strong silhouette against the sky. There's always extenuating situations, but in general, that's the rule. So I'm just getting some of the water color down, and that is, anytime you have a reflection of water, it's going to be a little bit darker than what it is reflecting. So in this case, the green grass is above it, so I'm painting it just a little bit more olive green and a little darker down below. And then I added some more phthalo green and yellow ochre into that water to really give it that green emerald color. Still trying to maintain that area as my darkest dark. Sometimes when you start putting paint down, you can have a tendency to lose the strength of your value pattern that you had. So it's important to not lose that strong design that you had. And that what you saw here at the beginning with my composition, another term for that dark, medium, and light is, more like that dark and light. It's called no-tan, and that is just that strong pattern of basically black and white. And when you boil a painting down or a photograph or image down into just black and white, no gray, no middle tone, you can see the actual design elements. And there's a phone app you can get. I will post the name of the app in the description of this video. And you can take a picture of a scene, and there is, it's called posterize. You can take that picture that you just took and posterize it and see it in your no-tan and it helps you get that strong sense of design. You can also boil it down into just 3 values, dark, medium, and light, with this app. So it's pretty handy to have on your phone. All those tricks that we need when you're out there painting. So I added a little bit more blue to those pine trees as they came down because I just wanted to give them that sense of cool shadow because the sunlight was so warm. And this passage in here, I'd start getting a little bit more of that olive green, yellow ochre feel. as the sun just sort of filters through those pine trees. And then I keep that up there pretty cool. By cool tone, cool and warm tone, I use it a lot, and I apologize if I just assume that you understand that cool tones are very blue. Shadows are often cool in nature, blues and purples and those softer tones like that. And then the warmer tones are, of course, on the orangey gold side of the color family. And a lot of times anything sunlit is going to be lit in a warm glow. So trying again to just maintain my dark values here. So I mixed in ultramarine blue, little burnt sienna, yellow ochre, keeping the integrity of that shape. And for these 4 little videos, I didn't speed them up or edit them at all. I decided I'm just going to go ahead and let this be an hour-long video because I did 4 little paintings and they're pretty quick per painting, so you can always fast forward if you want to see another one. So they're in full time. So all I'm doing here in this is just refining the shape and pulling out that integrity, making sure that none of it got muddied or lost. I liked the strong angle that I had there, really showing the sort of that anatomy of that hillside. And then I liked how the diagonals in the actual image pointed to the area that is the focal point in the painting, which will be that waterfall and that bright sunlit patch of grass. So really wanted to keep those strong angles and sense of design that way. So just working on a little bit of this here. I thought that I would add some texture and interest to this passage here right at the beginning of the painting because it kind of gave it a lead in, that little moment of strong contrast there that sort of invited you into the painting and brought you to the area of the focal point because it kind of directs you up that way. It doesn't need very much. These little studies, this study in particular, I was really, again, like I said, trying to focus on it being like a plein air painting and just wanted that fresh, fleeting feel of if I was out there in the mountain, what would these colors be? And so that's what I was kind of working on. Popping in that waterfall, so pretty. I was trying to pull out that illusion of the river being back there, like it goes back into the painting and turns around and heads towards the waterfall. And I'm just about done with this one. Pulling in a few more darker, stronger accents with a little tiny brush. Just a cheap synthetic little tiny thing. Again, these dark passages were important to the design and composition because, again, they point you to the focal point. And then gonna put in that bright clouds and the strong contrast up there. And I just grabbed white for that. Typically, if I was gonna pull this into a bigger painting, I'd be adding a lot more colors into that white and not using just stark white. But for this little study, I just wanted the sense of composition and design, so I kept it just white. And you see, as I lay the paint down, I kind of turn it and twist the brush a little because I don't want it to intermingle too much with the dark right next to it being so wet. So I'm turning the brush as it touches that, and then I'll get some cleaner paint. A little patch of blue sky. Just ultramarine blue and white. I liked the shape actually that I saw in the photograph too. So I kind of echoed that in the painting because, again, it points you to the focal point. Soften some of those edges. And then now, because I had the whites of those clouds, I was better able to gauge the intensity that I needed my sunlit passages to be. So at this point now I can really pop those out because I know how bright those clouds are going to be. So that's my scale. And it's sort of a nicer transition there because I have the white of the clouds and then it cascades down this movement of light into the valley. It has, I think, overall a nice gradual feel of drifting sunlight. And that one's pretty much done. Pretty close. A few more little things to do. The river back there. I guess that it seemed a little bit lost. It's important for the composition. All right, and here it is up close. Okay, so this is the very simple little still life that I set up that I'm going to start working on now. And I just wanted a really simple little vase set up with a pear just to show how you would take a couple simple objects and think about them in the format of a rectangle canvas and allowing yourself enough space around the objects to feel like there's air and that the objects can breathe and that they have enough size for importance but not too overwhelming. So when I laid this down, as you saw, I did very loosely with just a little brush, little Gamsol, a little bit of paint. And I'm just kind of massing in, thinking if it's about this size, that gives it that much space. And then I'm using the drapery of the fabric behind to help lay down this sort of gentle C shape in the composition. And I also will use that, as you see, to have a lead in. So it's almost like a sideways V for the composition. So I have my dark mask coming in from that way, and it will lead in from the lower left-hand corner, directing the eye up to the vase and the pear. Everything about the composition needs to be focused on the center of interest. And so in this little painting, I have the middle tone down first, and then I'm just massing in where the shapes are going to live, and then the dark tones. So I always kind of begin with laying in my strong anchors first, very loosely. And that way, if I make a mistake, it's really easy just to wipe it off and start over instead of drawing. I find that if you draw onto your canvas, your image, you tend to get a little more precious with it and you stay inside the lines. And when you're painting your design on the canvas, you're already in that painting mindset. And so to me, I find that this is it seems like a more appropriate approach to beginning a painting. Just my opinion. So again, here are the anchors, and in the background of those objects, I did use a little bit more of the burnt sienna and the ultramarine blue. For the vase, burnt sienna and yellow ochre. For the vase, I'm using more ultramarine blue because it is a blue vase into the burnt sienna shadow. So as that shadow moves towards the light, I use less burnt sienna and more just blue and white. And I really want to get the overall feel of the painting down as quickly as possible. I can always go back in and refine shapes and add details. I don't even add the flowers that are on the vase because for the purpose of the study, it wasn't essential. Since I'm really just talking about composition and design, size, placement. So that's my focus. Always with the intent of keeping it feeling fresh and light and easy. As soon as things start to look labored over and fussy, they really lose that fun feeling of the joy of looking at art. And you can have very tight, polished, beautiful paintings that still look fresh. Just wanted to clarify that. So that vase is pretty much just ultramarine blue and white. I really didn't feel it was necessary to add any other colors. I'm just working on some of that background color, just yellow ochre, little white. I think on that side, it appeared to me when I looked at the still life that it was brighter. The background was brighter on the shadowed side of the vase, which is sort of a compositional trick you can do to make something appear to have a lot more atmosphere and air. On the shadowed side of an object, you put the background as lighter, and on the lit side of that object, you make it a little bit darker. You can see how I took that ochre and I kept it darker than the shadowed side background. And so that will make that vase pop right up in front of the background. Just little tricks you can do. And you can do that whether you're painting a portrait or a tree or anything. All of it is all about keeping the eye where you want it to go, telling the viewer where to go, how long to stay. I'm holding you by putting that light passage behind the vase. The shadow of the vase then holds. Light will move you through a painting, and you can direct the eye where you want the viewer to look by using light, but the shadow will hold. So I'm working on getting some of that foreground. It's a brighter value and it's closer to us, so it's going to have more intensity. Everything close to you is more, everything further away is less. Less color, less brushwork, less contrast, lesser value. So obviously up close it's going to be much more intense. So that's the shadow of the pear, and I know it's pretty tiny and difficult to see, but it's kind of just like a darker green color. And I just really wanted to keep it simple. I think I really just used 3 values in this pear. Just the shadow side was my dark, and then I mixed up just a nice clean yellow patch for the rest of the pear with a highlight then. Okay, so I'm just working on the pear, and that is just cadmium yellow pale and white. I think there might be the slightest bit of green in there, just to separate it a little bit from the background too. And I just laid it down. I let my brushwork show the contour of the pear, and just allowed the brushwork to do most of the defining of the shape. Okay, so I'm working on some of the background here, and I added a little bit more burnt sienna to that and the yellow ochre just to warm it up a little bit. A little more white where the light is hitting that more intense, right in that passage. White and cadmium yellow. Again, just really trying to focus on capturing that sense of place for these objects in this canvas, giving them plenty of room for the light to come into the painting, the air to sort of flow around the objects, and then to just sort of leave. And so as far as composition design, it's really it's a very simple setup, and I was focused mostly on the size and placement for this still life and sort of that reverse C design. And then I'm working out sort of the shadow masses over on this side, the whole left side, where I want the eye to move and where I want the eye to hold. So, and that's just what I'm working on in there, cleaning up some of these passages. Looking at this, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on these. Going back, I would have made that shadow there as it shoots off the edge of the canvas a little less, maybe a little less intense, just so that it didn't really shoot us off. But, oh well, the video's done, so anyway, but that right there is an angle that I just put in because I felt that it helped hold the eye into the canvas a little bit better. All right, and then just working on some of those interior things on the vase. I didn't really add the flowers, just was thinking about a few of the little, just some details to add some interest, but that's it. And then I put the highlight in on the rim. Worked on just kind of pulling some of that shape together a little bit. I felt that by adding that lighter barrier, it didn't shoot us right off the canvas from the dark shadow of the vase going up to the dark shadow of the fabric, that design element. I needed that break in there of the rim of the vase. I think it helped just sort of stop the eye from traveling all over. And that's the inside of the vase, that little shadow. And just a few little highlights. That's it. It's amazing how by putting that one bright highlight on an object, all of a sudden now it has 3 dimensions. It comes out of the canvas at us. And because you have the shadow and then you have the middle tone and then that one highlight. It's so beautiful. That's my favorite part of it. And so I just softened that side of the vase over there a little bit. You want to make sure that if you're painting something round that you give it a soft edge, or it will convey a feeling of flatness and sharpness. So there's my little highlights on the pear. And then I give it a stem and a shadow on the stem, and that little study's pretty much done. I didn't want to get too fussy with it. Just the idea of keeping it light and small, very simple little arrangement. And then I'm just softening that shadow there so that it wasn't too stark. So I'm glad I actually did that. I was worried. Now I feel better with it. So here it is finished. Just very simple. But these are great to do at home if you want to just grab a few pictures or set up a couple different still lifes, or even if you're out plein air painting, divide a piece of canvas into 4 parts and then just do some quick studies. This was a photograph I took years ago out in Oregon. I loved this hazy gray atmospheric effect, and so it's fun to show people how to play with those. And I thought that the composition was fascinating with that little clump further back and with the balanced weight of the larger clump that sort of fades to the background. The focal point obviously being right about where they meet. And so I'm working on just laying in those big masses, the big mass of the bigger trees and then of course the smaller ones. And then I loved the dark of the road as it turned and went into the focal point area. So it was a very strong design, and That's what I'm working on. So you always want to take into consideration, even in this little tiny rectangle, I think these are all about 4 by 5 inches. Just take into consideration those 4 edges and where your objects are going to live inside there. How close to the edges are they going to go? And exactly where on the canvas is your center of interest going to be? I mean, obviously, you don't want it right in the middle, but if you can arrange your center of interest to be off-center, up in one of those 4 quadrants of the middle area, off to the left or right, down below or whatever. And so this one's kind of a good example for that, because the road leads in and is sort of off-center to the lower left. And so I'll really, this is just a very monochromatic black and white painting, looking at engaging my darkest darks, my middle tones, and my lightest lights. And so that's what my area is here. The road has the darkest darks, and so I'm comparing the value of the trees to the value of what's happening in the road. And I'm noticing that some of those passages are just a little bit lighter than the road, and then they gradate as they go back into the distance. I'm trying to keep my brushwork really loose. And again, with this one too, I'm trying to keep it feeling like it might have been a plein air. And you can do plein airs in black and white, and they're beautiful. In this case, obviously I'm not using black. It's just burnt sienna and ultramarine blue and white. I did use a little bit of yellow ochre. There was some grasses and dead stuff in the snow as it was coming out, and I thought that it added a nice element too of warmth, bringing that foreground closer to us. So I add that stuff right at the end. Again, just massing in the overall bulk of the trees and the snow patterns. Those things were all very important elements to the design, and I didn't want them to be all spotty and sort of incoherent where it didn't really make sense. So it's sort of a little bit of rhythm that I had going down there in the road, creating this interesting pattern that drew us into the painting and up and around to the focal area. And then the same thing with as the light was filtering through all the pine trees, just kept it really interesting for the eye. You want to create those areas that are fun and interesting to look at, and also have resting places for the eye. And what I like about this image was that the sky was very restful and very quiet and didn't demand any attention at all, and it just allowed the viewer to play in the areas where the focal area was. So when you go out and you do these kind of studies in plein air, you can just tape off your canvas just like this and try to find areas. Try one all in black and white, or do one where it's just no tan, only black and white, not just monochromatic, but it will force you to see design and challenge you to look at those different weights and using a larger item and balancing it out with a smaller one, as in this little painting. And so I'm just kind of finishing things up in there. And trying to show you some of my mixing in here too. I hope that you can see it. Sometimes I held the palette too low, and I do apologize for that. But, so this is just, titanium white. There is a little bit of the burnt sienna ultramarine blue gray mixture that I normally use. A little teeny bit of yellow ochre just to warm it. So here, once you get your mass in place and you're happy with the values of those masses, then you can start with using the background to, in this case with these pine trees, I wanted them to blend and marry with that sky and feel like they're one with the sky. So I will paint the sky around those trees and use it to carve out the pine branches and the little negative spaces and soften edges. And so that's what I'm working on here, just sculpting those trees out by using the background. And with pine trees, you have to keep your brush just little flicks and little soft little fits, fits. And lose as many edges as you can. So that's what I'm working on. I love these pine trees. Where I grew up in Minnesota, we had hundreds, if not thousands of acres of pine forests, and I used to ride horse in the woods, and I could hear the wind and the pines, and you never forget that beautiful sound of the wind rushing through pines. And they're one of my favorite trees, especially as the snow is falling. And I hoped to capture that. I did this painting years ago, larger, and it sold, but I should do another one. This one particularly just made me feel very warm and comfortable inside. And so again, back here, I'm just working on sort of unifying the sky. The brushworks were a little too distracting, so I'm trying to keep them quieter, and then using that background color to really push that gradation, that scale from the dark being up close to the far away being very light. Just tightening that up. And I loved those trees that were barely visible, so I tried to capture some of those really close value relationships there. Just cleaning that, tightening that. And this is pretty close to a tonalist painting. If you have the opportunity to study the tonalist painters, if you can observe how close their value relationships are, it's incredible. There's nothing alarming or shocking about the painting. It's just very quiet, and I think I love the tonalist paintings best, especially as the sun filters through to the trees and there's this golden warm twilight. Everything is just connected. And that's kind of one of those things, even though I don't have sunlight in this painting, I really wanted to make sure that things were all connected in this just really peaceful unity. And so this one's just about done. I'm adding some warmer spots, like I said at the beginning, just to really pull the eye in and feel like grass, dead grasses and things growing. And here's the finished painting. Study. It's just a study. If I had time, I would have splattered snow and stuff. Alright, so this one, I thought it'd be fun just to throw in sort of a figure. I always thought that this was a cool photograph of this guy in this historical setting. So I'm going to just show quickly how I would put him in arrangement, massing in just a general idea of, okay, his head's going to be here. If his head's here and this big, then how big is the rest of him? Taking into account, again, the 4 rectangles, allowing him enough space for integrity of his face, and also allowing atmosphere and air to flow around him. And so I'm thinking about the structure of his anatomy, the arms, and his really casual reclining feel, that gesture of him. And so I'm just loosely laying that in. And I'm using that little brush again, just in the burnt sienna ultramarine blue, thinned with some Gamsol, just to draw it in place. And, as I go along on this painting, this little study, my original drawing here kind of gets moved and adjusted as I make those sort of corrections moving along. So another reason why I prefer just to paint on. So I'm just getting in the structure of his hat, and then I'm really going to just keep focused on the dark passages and the whole area of where all my darks connect, from under the hat, the side of the face, his whole arm and the lower portion of his arm and leg, and the chair, that whole corner. I think it had a really strong sense of design in that area. And then I'm using, you'll see as I go through this, I'll use the background to help play with some of those features to make some, where I don't want the eye to go, I'll keep the background closer in value range to whatever it is in the foreground. We're not going to be interested in looking at values that are really close together like that. So as a compositional element, that is doing its job to say, don't look here. So where I want the eye to travel, it's going to be stronger contrast, interesting shapes, design, pattern. In this case here, there was a little bit of this interesting background structure that I wanted to incorporate into the painting as it was part of the narrative of his character. And so when you have a figure like this, if there are things that might explain who the person is, then you can add those, keeping in mind that you don't want them to compete with their face and what they're doing. So I am just taking a tone, and I just took some thinner and kind of wiped out where I want his face to go within the space that I allowed for his face. I'll go back through and adjust things a little. This little study is not about doing a portrait painting, but it's about laying in a figure in a compositional context here. And so that is just refining shapes here, trying to get some of that a little bit more accurate. There's a nice light spot for the top of his hat that did, it was a nice compositional feature to say, this is where this part of the painting stops. This is the top of his head, and then there's that darker passage that I took and ran it all the way into the corner. So that shadow, like I said before, is going to hold. Light moves, shadows hold. And so that shadow is holding us in the painting. And I allow for a movement of light in that whole background passage to go from on the right side, nice and dark, because it's holding us in there at his face. And then as it moves over towards the left corner, I lighten up the whole passage there because we're free to leave the canvas if we need to. You know what I mean? Just travel throughout the painting. So just taking some paper towel here and wiping out where I want to kind of get in there and just clean it up a little bit. All right. Now I can go back through and just tighten up some of those things that I was working on. And I just mixed up a very subtle skin tone. His skin tone, I mean, it's not accurate. It's just sort of a passage where, what did I add? Burnt sienna, yellow ochre, a little bit of white, just to give me the idea of his face is in here. If I was going to do this painting as a commission, a nice bigger painting, I would very typically do a small study like this just to help me work out the composition. And I don't get into color in this little study, but I do and I would work out the value patterns and just solve some of those problems before I get to a larger canvas. And so when you have a more complicated painting, that's a nice thing to do, one of these little studies. And as you can see on this video, I did 4 of them in, the span of this hour. It really doesn't take long to do a study. It's kind of like a thumbnail sketch. You don't have to do it with every painting, but for a bigger, more complex one, it's not a bad idea. So just softening that shadow transition where the hat covers and obscures the top of his face. And I liked the beard, how that created an interest and that contrast. So that's always a nice feature when you have that, to use that to your advantage of creating a focal point in the painting. So that being said, obviously the face of a painting, a portrait, is going to be the focal point. So everything in the painting has to, in some way, lead the eye to that. So looking at his arms and his shoulders, the angles, even his hat, it all keeps us in that sphere. Taking that little tiny brush, and I just kind of wanted some of those to have a little bit more refinement in there. Just trying to capture some of the shapes a little bit more accurately. For that, getting some of those values in place. Remembering too that while this is a photograph, shadows are going to be much blacker and darker in photographs. So in reference to no-tan, it's handy to have that black and white contrast, but to use photos as your sole reference, it can be very dangerous as far as getting your values accurate. Really try to observe and study from life as much as you are able to. That way, when you do have to work from photos, because everybody has to at some point, you have a better knowledge of experience from working from life. Just knowing that, these values wouldn't be this dark, they would have more light, more atmosphere, and you can adjust accordingly. So just moving down the painting and working on just putting some paint down and strong value patterns. And I just take some time in here to really try to get the anatomy of this accurate and interesting, because I really liked the patterns that I saw. Not so much, it didn't bother me. I wasn't really worried about trying to get the stripes of his jacket. More, I was interested in just the overall strength of the shadows and those dark tones. So here where his arm is resting on the arm of the chair, I thought, you know what, I'm going to unite that whole shadow area. It was just stronger, and then into that I could add subtle variations. Yes, I should have been using a bigger brush. But, oh well. Middle tone. And, I'm just really using the burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, titanium white, a little bit of yellow ochre. Just kept that really strong and simple. Yeah. Thinking about, having feeling in what you're doing, feeling for line and form. if you have that sort of sensitivity to those beautiful things in nature that are provided as far as line and form, you can come up with the most gorgeous paintings. And so I'm just working on just adding those variations that I talked about, getting that light hitting his lap and trying to maintain a sense of simplicity with this painting as well. There's strength in just simplifying things. 3 values: light, medium, and dark. So I'm starting to pop in some of those brighter lights now to give it more of a sense of 3-dimensional qualities. And that light is just white and yellow ochre, I think that's what I used. But you can see how once you get that lighter contrast on there, it really starts to hold together as a unified painting. When you have the dark and the medium, it's okay, but that light really hits it, and then the light moves and you can really start telling the story that way. But before you can put that strong highlight down, you really have to have the foundation of the holding shadows. So now I am just cleaning up the painting and just getting it wrapped up. This has been a really fun video, and I hope that it's been interesting and that you guys have enjoyed it. I was asked in a couple of my workshops and classes to do something like this in plein air, and I thought it might make a really interesting video to do this with, basically 3 different subject matters, and just talking about composition and simplicity. So I hope it was enjoyable, and I appreciate all of your support and your comments. I try to get at your comments, and it's very special. It means a lot, you guys. Thank you. So really all I'm doing here for the rest of this little study is just tightening things up, like I said, and within passages of values, you want to keep the integrity of that value range. And so in that background, in the upper left-hand corner, I wanted that whole passage light with a few variations of value changes within that spectrum. And then down below, in the lower right-hand corner, I wanted that darker passage with just the subtle light variations. So it kept the integrity of that shape. And I think I popped in a little bowl and just some other little things in there that added interest. Just cleaning it up. I think that this one I will turn into a larger painting. I've been interested in painting this guy for a while. I think he has this really cool sort of charisma, and I thought it'd be fun to try to capture it. So I've done my little value study. So I'm all set. Maybe that'll be one of my upcoming videos. I can talk about that. And I noticed that I wanted that value back there just a little bit darker, so I thought that might be interesting to darken that and let on the right side of his face be lighter, and on this side be a little bit darker. So just cleaning that up. And I want I add this little highlight to his hat right there, and I think that helps to connect the highlight, or that whole lit passage in the upper left hand, with his hat, so that there's that interesting connectivity there. I've always heard it said that your lights in a painting, just like your darks, should in one way or another be connected, so that if they could be connected and you could have a little herd of cows wandering around the pasture, that they would all have an entrance and exit into all your lights and also all your darks. So they're all connected. And there's strength and unity in that idea, just connecting everything. And so this would be a fun one, and maybe I will turn this into a larger painting and share the video. Here is the painting finished right up here, or the study. So very loose, nothing really tightly committed, but you get the idea. And here are all 4 of them that I did today. And I wanted to thank you guys for joining me. This was a lot of fun. Thanks so much. All right, well, that wraps it up. I wanted to thank you guys so much for joining me. And if you liked it, go ahead and like and subscribe. I appreciate it. All right, thanks so much. Have a good weekend, guys. Bye-bye.